Well, I don't know about you or how your Tuesday has gone, but for many of us involved in the world of golf media, it has been a seismic, some would say cataclysmic day from a news-making standpoint. And if you're just kind of coming around to it, perhaps you've been on vacation or maybe at work or somehow engaged otherwise in life, right around, I would say 10 a.m. Eastern time, in my world at least, my phone began blowing up with news that the PGA Tour and LIV Golf were suddenly going to join forces. I did not see this coming, nor did anybody else. I am glad to be joined on this emergency podcast by my friend Ryan Ballengee from Golf News Net. Ryan, how is your otherwise mild-mannered Tuesday progressing up till this point?
It was great up until about 10 when I finished recording my podcast for the day, which I will now have to re-record, and found out that the world had changed a lot in a very substantial way. And I think leaves a whole lot more questions than answers. I have tons of questions. I think the players will too. They have a player meeting with Jay Monahan at 4 p.m. today in Canada. It's not a loaded field. There's 10 of the world top 50. So I assume that a bunch of the top players will be zooming in some fashion. And this is probably the biggest stunner of my lifetime covering golf. And it will be the biggest stunner of my lifetime covering golf.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. If you try to rank this in terms of those shocking moments in the game, I will probably always have the Payne Stewart plane crash incident as the top of the list. But I think this moves right into number two. I can't think of what else would be next. Partially because, Ryan, we have been very clearly told by the commissioner, who now appears to have a giant L stamped on his forehead. We have been told by Jay Monahan in no uncertain terms that there would never be a pathway for any of this sort of thing to happen. None of those players would have a pathway that he could see to come back to competing on the tour. And then this morning on his letterhead is the memo that begins with this statement: "Today is a momentous day for your organization." This is from the commissioner to the players, "and the game of golf as a whole. The PGA Tour, your tour, is leading the formation of a new commercial entity to unify golf, one that sees the end of the disruption and distraction that has divided the men's professional game for the better part of 3 years. Through a framework agreement, the Public Investment Fund is contributing its golf-related commercial businesses and rights, including LIV Golf, contributing, along with a significant financial investment toward minority equity ownership of a new collectively held for-profit LLC. And this new entity, yet to be named, will also include the PGA Tour's commercial businesses and rights, as well as those of the DP World Tour." And in the next few moments, Ryan, we'll dig more into what is to follow as that two-page letter continues. But just for those first two paragraphs, what are you hearing?
Well, the initial thing to hear is that the PGA Tour is going to separate its operations and tournament ownership and those pieces, some significant pieces of their business, from a 501c6 membership organization to a for-profit organization. And those assets of the DP World Tour will be joined in, which, by the way, the PGA Tour had a sizable stake of through the DP World Tour Productions for-profit that they had invested in. And LIV Golf will be merged into this group. I assume LIV Golf as a concept will probably more or less go away. And the Saudis are willing to put an enormous sum of money into the investment of what this new entity will be. You would think it's an astronomical sum of money compared to the billions they've already thrown at LIV Golf.
Right.
And from there, they will figure out how they will operate tournaments, They say LIV Golf will be one of the premier corporate sponsor, which I don't know what that means
Can you imagine?
for Charles Schwab or RBC or Travelers
How about
Insurance
FedEx?
or name all of those folks. And then the DP World Tour owns a slice of the Ryder Cup. So now the PGA Tour and the Saudis own a piece of the Ryder Cup. Unless that is separated into its own separate organization. But no matter what, whether it's the DP World Tour or this new holding group, owns a piece of the Ryder Cup. So there are 500 questions I have, but those are the initial thoughts of that, what that language means. Now, what that means for all of the players who stuck their necks out literally and figuratively for the last year and change. Rory McIlroy, John Rahm, Scotty Scheffler to a degree, Tiger Woods, Ricky. Go down the line of players who not only chose to defend the PGA Tour in good faith, but also declined hundreds of millions of dollars, if not collectively billions of dollars, from LIV Golf, are now in a position where they're going to take on Saudi money for their tour, and ostensibly probably going to have to welcome back most, if not all, of the LIV Golf players that were on the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour back to their competitive ranks.
In some of the minutia that is detailed in this 2-page letter, which, by the way, comically has as a subhead "privileged and confidential." I mean, that's comical. That was never going to be the case. But part of the minutia that the lawyers will enjoy and the accountants, it says the PGA Tour Inc. will remain in place as a 501c6 tax-exempt organization and retains administrative oversight of the PGA Tour, including the sanctioning of events, the administration of competition and rules, as well as other inside-the-ropes responsibilities. I remain as commissioner of the PGA Tour and Ed Herlihy as PGA Tour Policy Board Chairman. Here we go. Check this out. The Public Investment Fund, PIF, PIF's governor, Yasir Al-Romoyan, will join the PGA Tour Policy Board. Upon execution of a definitive agreement, the board of directors, which will oversee and direct all of this new entity's golf-related commercial operations, businesses, and investments, will now include Al-Romoyan as chairman and me, Jay Monahan, as chief executive officer. The two of us will also be part of the new entity's executive committee. The PGA Tour will appoint a majority of the board and hold a majority voting interest in this combined entity. Ryan Ballengee, the Saudis, as you said, just bought the PGA Tour. Am I being ridiculous to read that into this?
I wouldn't say they bought the PGA Tour. I would say they bought into the PGA Tour. And the two things that are important in that are that the stake that the Saudi Public Investment Fund will take is a quote unquote minority stake, and that the PGA Tour will still have control over the board. So they'll win a 5-4, 6-5 decision moving forward. But the Saudis got what they wanted because they wanted to invest in the PGA Tour. They wanted to have a piece of that. And when the tour said no, they went and found the next best thing to them, which was LIV Golf. And now the Saudis have found a way to exactly what they wanted. They can cleanly dispose of LIV Golf, and we move on like it never happened, except for the fact that everything that we've talked about for almost 2 years is seemingly been thrown back in the faces of the players who defended the PGA Tour, certainly Commissioner Jay Monahan, and frankly, a lot of people who have spoken out publicly in media or otherwise in defense of the PGA Tour not embracing the Saudi money and fighting against it.
Let me bring in another voice, friend of ours from golfunfiltered.com, Adam Fonseca. Adam, what's your Tuesday morning been like?
Well, is any news break today, guys? I mean, this is nuts, isn't it? Ryan, good to see you too, by the way.
Hey, Adam, how are you?
Good, good. Yeah, so I just caught kind of the end of what Ryan was just mentioning, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is a complete slap in the face for any PGA Tour loyalist that decided to, of course, not to repeat what Ryan just said, but remain loyal to the tour that made them. And the fact that, I think, if anything, the thing that just is crazy to me is that no players on either tour knew anything about this. It just reeks of, not knowing the details, but it reeks of a threat made in some way. And Monahan was put into a position he needed to make a decision, like right now. And the fact that even Live Golf got on the phone with Greg Norman prior to going on CNBC, it's kind of along those same lines, that this is very reactionary. And we're already hearing some of the feedback and the outpouring and the blowback, so to speak, from tour players on site saying, well, I guess this is how it is now. That players only meeting that's coming up in a couple of days is going to be absolutely incredible. I wouldn't be surprised if Tiger Woods is on a private jet right now, to be honest with you. I mean, this is absurd.
So does any of this happen outside of the approval of Tiger and Rory? There's something, I know it's a somewhat of a rhetorical question, because I guess none of the three of us knows for sure. But having seen the amount of money both of them turned down in the initial recruitment effort by LIV, and then B, seeing the very loud and public stances they both took in reshaping the current flow, the current wealth distribution on the PGA Tour. Certainly taking a leadership role, much like Jack and Mr. Palmer would have done a few decades ago. Does this step happen? Does Jay Monahan and his board enter into whatever this agreement is without at least firing off a text to Tiger and to Rory and going, hey, some things have been developing. I thought you might want to know. I cannot imagine, Ryan, that this took place in a vacuum without at least those voices being aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very small universe of people who knew this thing was happening. Probably less than, I thought originally less than 10, but let's say, I mean, there's a 9-person board on the PGA Tour. They knew. There are 4 players on that board. Rory McIlroy is one of them. He had to know. He almost had to have some semblance of an idea of what was happening here. He might not have known all the minutia, but that had to have been approved. It had to have been a board vote. You would think Tiger would know, or at least have been given a heads up. But either way, whether they were or whether they were not, I feel like the conversation, however brief, that Rory McIlroy had at the PGA Championship when he was asked ahead of the tournament about LIV and trying to project out LIV and where it might be 3 years from now, and he took a very curt tone and said he didn't want to talk about it. That takes on a different meaning now, especially if he knew, because this thing came together seemingly extremely quickly. And I don't know what that timeline is, but McIlroy was asked about the guys that resigned their DP World Tour membership not being able to be Ryder Cup captains a month ago in Charlotte. Then had the curt conversation at the PGA Championship, has been quiet on the subject since, and for reasons, what they are, I don't know, but now we're here today. So something changed in 3 weeks or less between the PGA, between Charlotte and today. Something changed, and I don't know exactly what that is, and maybe we'll never know. I think there are a lot of things that could have precipitated this, and maybe they all just kind of came to a head to a quick agreement.
Making this even more mind-blowing to me is that yesterday, literally at this exact time, at noon, I was at the Detroit Golf Club for the Rocket Mortgage Classic Media Day. They brought in Mike Tirico to be the MC for the day. They had, of course, all of the Quicken, the Rocket Mortgage folks, leadership, but they had Tony Finau via Zoom from home because he's the defending champion, talking about all. At no point during the day did the acronym LIV ever even get mentioned? So I have no doubt that the folks involved in that event and the other tour events were as blindsided by the news this morning as all of us. And yet as I look further into this letter from Jay Monahan, there's on page 2, a couple of interesting bullet points that make me wonder, Ryan, kind of going along with what you said, if there was some sort of Damocles hanging over the tour that prompted this pretty over the top reaction. And here it says, notably, today's announcement brings about an end to all pending litigation between the participating entities and prohibits any further recruitment of PGA Tour, DP World Tour, or LIV Golf members. Now, I guess that's kind of a throw-in, because if you're going to merge, I don't know what recruitment there would be. I thought throughout all of this, Adam, through the last couple of years, I thought that at every single instance, I thought the tour was winning. I never viewed LIV as being a threat to them. Yes, they had some big names defect, but in the aftermath of that, we have seen some new stars rise up. We have seen that nobody's watching LIV. Nobody's watching LIV. You can't find them on the CW. They're cutting away early to tournaments. Their YouTube videos get fewer views than any of us doing a review of a rangefinder. So I didn't think the tour was losing, but today they acted like they were losing. Do you think it's connected at all to pending litigation? That's an interesting first bullet point for him to share with the players.
That was my takeaway from it too. And one of the things, you're right, Bill. I mean, the PGA Tour seemed like they were winning any litigation that was coming to head. We saw LIV players falling off of lawsuits. I think there were just a handful, or maybe even 1 or 2 players remaining on that lawsuit. But what we didn't see yet was a conclusion to any antitrust talk. I believe, and because it was highlighted in that letter that you're referencing, there was still litigation around that regarding, what could have come out in the discovery process. And by the way, if you saw, Augusta National came out with somewhat of a statement saying, oh yeah, we're good with everything. Well, of course they're going to be good with everything, because they were wrapped up in this too. Now, this is complete conjecture. I want to be completely clear with that, but it kind of says to me, and I've said to a few others who would know, I'm not a lawyer, but others are, who I've talked to, they said, look, they're going to get antitrusted into oblivion, the PGA Tour. Something came out, perhaps this is a mutual agreement between the PIF and the PGA Tour to say, hey, look, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. All of this just goes away, because discovery ends when there's no further litigation. So if they're not going to be digging any deeper into anything, then how do we get out of this? So that's one, again, complete conjecture. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is something that even on social, people I've spoken with, even the kind of tone of this conversation, it's almost like people are mourning right now. There's this somber feeling of, oh my goodness, everyone just kind of, I don't know, but there's this release where we were all pent up, we were picking our sides, and now it's a matter of, all right, well, this happened, what do we think about it now? And oh, by the way, I think this might end litigation between LIV and the PGA Tour. If I'm Rory, if I'm Tiger, if I'm Jordan, JT, Rahm, I'm suing Jay Monahan for any of this.
Or your players' council, or whatever the hierarchy looks like. And I think, Adam, that's a really good word, like mourning. In my world, and you guys are welcome to share your opinions on it. I don't really care if there's competition for the PGA Tour. That's fine. That's great. Competition is theoretically what makes us all stronger. I have always, from the very beginning of all of this, had a problem with the source of the funding, not the fact that there was funding. And I've been engaged in numerous conversations with, well, what about the whatabouts? What about the this? Yeah, I get it. I understand there are a number of contradictions in our culture that would lead us down this path. Well, why are you using an iPhone? That's generated. I get it. But in the golf context, my dilemma has always been not the fact that there's a rival tour, but that the rival Tour is a murderous, bloodthirsty regime that still treats people as if they're living in the 1200s. And they do that now. The tour, whether it was stated plainly or implied, took a stand in some degrees about the morality of it all. You've heard Brandel Chambly talk about the morality of it all a lot. Eamon Lynch, the same thing on Golf Channel. And I guess I would kind of have found myself giving them thumbs up in many of the things they said. Not all the things, but in many of the things they said. I think that Phil would lose the debate if he were to come on and talk with Brandel about all of this. However, all of a sudden, in my case, the mourning, if there is such a thing, or maybe the shock of it would be, how naive could I possibly have been as a 55-year-old guy to forget the core axiom of all of professional sports? It always comes back to the money. Always. There's no asterisk. There's no parentheses. There's no footnote. It always comes back to the money. And we see this letter. I have to think there's a number of tour players who right now are sitting around shaking their heads. I saw Tom Gillis go and post right away on Twitter. I was trying to get Tommy to join us on here. There's a bunch of them who are just stunned by what's happened. And that's not even, by the way, digging into what the landscape's going to look like with the competitive side of things. Here's bullet point number 2 in Monahan's letter. We will conduct a comprehensive evaluation of LIV Golf. I don't know what you still have to evaluate, and determine how best to integrate team golf into the professional game. The 2023 LIV Golf schedule will continue as planned. Interestingly enough, it does not say the 2023 PGA Tour schedule will continue as planned. Maybe it's just an omission. Maybe it's not there on purpose, Ryan. So you guys, I mean, you guys already know that I'm somewhat backwards and I'm pretty conservative, and probably politically the three of us would have a little bit different alignment with each other on certain issues. But on this one, for me, it's always been about the source of the money. Ryan, is there any mourning taking place for you?
Yeah, I think that's probably an appropriate word. I mean, my gripe with all of this has been the source, right? And I don't think I've made any bones about that in anything I've talked about this topic. And now that source is a big source for the biggest remaining professional golf organization in the world. And this new organization that's going to come about. That is heartbreaking. I mean, I don't have a better way of putting it. And this whole thing strikes me not so much as the PGA Tour losing, but mutually assured destruction. Because the Saudis didn't want discovery in their trial, in their suit, because that would have opened the books on the public investment fund and so many other things that the Saudis didn't want to be public. The PGA Tour didn't want the antitrust questions that were being asked in their lawsuit, because that would lead to discovery about their books and how they issue pay and where the money comes from and all that stuff. They didn't want that. LIV wasn't working as a business model. Less than a month ago, they were asking people to pay $3 a day on YouTube for Americans to watch their product.
Yeah.
That's how desperate that looked. The PGA Tour has been trying to reach out to sponsors, their hand out to give them 10, 11, 12 more $1 million per year to be a designated event. They've been losing sponsors. The ratings for non-designated events have been atrocious, very bad. The ratings for the PGA Championship were down 20% basically from last year. It's not their thing, but that tells you an indication of where golf is right now. And it just seems like everyone kind of got into a room very quickly and decided nobody is winning. We're all going to lose, just to different degrees in what we're losing. So the best available solution was to merge. And if we all work together, then we lose less. And that is just as heartbreaking on another level about all of this. And unfortunately, I have to hop on a quick call after this, but it just feels like a deflating kind of day that for so many people. I mean, even the LIV people, and I'm not sympathetic to them, but even the people who have put their time and effort into LIV, those people are going away.
Yeah.
They're out the door. And likely included among them is Greg Norman, who I have no sympathy for whatsoever. But the folks who invested their time and energy into the LIV product in good faith for what, we may disagree for why they did it, but they're out the door too. And there are a lot of people that are going to be hurt and upset by this. And I don't think there are going to be many people who are happy. And that makes it a really sad day for professional golf, in my view.
Well, Ryan, I know you have to run. Thank you for checking in with us. The third bullet point, Adam, as we look through some more of this letter from Jay Monahan to the players, ties right into a tweet that Scott Van Pelt just sent out. It says, so you preach loyalty to a tour and convince guys not to take 8- and 9-figure deals based in part on that loyalty and in part on the source of the money. Then those guys find out on Twitter you took the very same money. The third bullet point from Jay Monahan, we will work cooperatively to establish a fair and objective process for any players who desire to reapply for membership with the PGA Tour or the DP World Tour following the completion of this season, consistent with each tour's policies. This is a complicated endeavor and one that will be guided by established PGA Tour rules and regulations. Can you imagine Adam Fonseca being a guy that turned down $400 million, John Rahm, and now being told, by the way, they're here. And you'll be sharing a locker this week with a guy named Bryson, who is now worth, $800 million, even though you thought you'd never see him again. What are you doing if you're an existing PGA Tour player who made those decisions based on the reasons Van Pelt just pointed out?
Boy, I mean, if I'm one of those players, I am seriously wondering where my loyalties lie, period, in what I have chosen as my professional career. I mean, I would have to think that a lot of these guys feel that the rug has completely been pulled out from under them, and mainly due to the recency, some of which Ryan was just mentioning, to the recency of completely contradictory statements that my association's leadership was making compared to what just happened today. And, that, like you, I've always, my biggest point of contention has been the source of the funding. And what I found to be most heartbreaking or even shocking was the Public Investment Fund essentially just purchased the PGA Tour.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, they literally did that. And they have the right of first refusal for anything else that comes up. So this is, and actually to go on top of that, if I'm a PGA Tour player who turned down money, and I am also seeing that Jay Monahan somehow worked out a deal where he remains CEO of this new entity, I'm thinking
like Succession.
It's exactly like Succession. I am thinking that I was just used as a pawn in some way, right or wrong, Bill. But that's what I'm probably feeling as a PGA Tour player. Where do you go from here? I mean, some of the things that we've seen is, a lot of these guys, LIV guys, PGA Tour guys, they still talked. Some chose not to any longer. Jack Nicklaus, if you ask him, I mean, he said that Brooks Koepka, Cam Smith, he doesn't consider them part of the game anymore. But how do you reconcile if you're a great like Jack Nicklaus, who essentially helped create the tour along with Arnold Palmer and others? How do you reconcile this? I mean, you can continue to throw names in over and over and over again.
Well,
I mean, I think, yeah.
And let's throw in one more name in the reconciliation quiz, and that being the PGA Tour commissioner. Here he is last year on CBS Live with Jim Nantz.
It's reported in the New York Post yesterday by Brian Wacker about a 9/11 coalition of families and survivors of the 2001 terrorist attacks. 9/11 Families United sent a letter to the representatives of Phil, Dustin, Bryson, Reed, and others, quote, expressing their outrage towards the golfers for participating in the new league and accusing them of sports washing and betraying the United States, end quote. And that's gotten a lot of steam over the last 24 hours. That story first reported again in the New York Post. How much did you talk to your players about the possible ramifications if they sign on with the new league?
Well, I talked to players. I've talked at a player meeting, and I've talked to a number of players individually for a long period of time. And I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not know that there are significant implications. And as it relates to the families of 9/11, I have two families that are close to me that lost loved ones. And so my heart goes out to them. And I would ask, any player that has left or any player that would ever consider leaving, have you ever had to apologize for being a member of the PGA Tour?
I
Okay.
don't even, yeah.
Anybody want a part of that one? Anybody want to tackle that one for me, Jay Monahan? You know what? You can make, and it's not a stretch. This is not a difficult connection to make. You could make the case that as of today, there are some players on the PGA Tour who, through no fault of their own, might feel the need to apologize for being PGA Tour. This hasn't yet come to a vote, by the way. This has been shared with the membership, so to speak. There is still a vote to be taken. So what are some of the other ramifications and elements of this? How about this? There's the fourth bullet point in this letter. PIF will make a financial investment to become a premier corporate sponsor of the PGA Tour. PIF will make an additional investment in the new entity that will allow us to build an even stronger and more robust commercial business together. And PIF is committed to significant financial support toward causes that positively impact the game on a global basis. Nobody knows what any of that means. It is the pinnacle of corporate speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of thing that Congress does that drives us all crazy, where the dollars aren't real. I mean, they come out of your pocket in Congress, but where they're not real because they're able to just then send them to nebulous destinations because it's all tangentially connected to positively impacting things on a global basis. My friends, whether you love LIV or detest the concept of LIV, this is a bizarre day in the world of professional golf. Adam, I am so glad that both you and I have centered our programs, our projects, our involvement in the world of golf, largely in the amateur world, largely in the enjoyment of the game. Because if I was a no laying up, or if I was a podcast or a broadcast outlet that relied on partnerships with the tours, man, I would be in a world of hurt right now, because I would be probably cut off. I would be as livid in those settings as players most likely will be in that player meeting at 4 o'clock. Can you see this going smoothly when Monahan gets the guys in a room and says, no, guys, you misread it. This is really how it is?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think this is going to be an incredibly important turning point in the career of Jay Monahan and, of course, the PGA Tour. The players, as we're already seeing on Twitter, as well as, text messages being shared, they are angry on the PGA Tour side. And I do not anticipate them holding back in that meeting, which is, there's no mistake why It's not being televised, of course. You know, we're going to hear the fallout following that meeting. But, you know, it's funny because me and my team at GU, we have a chat thread. And when this was happening, both of my other team members basically just said, you know, I don't think we need to cover the PGA Tour anymore. To your point about us kind of centering around the amateur. I mean, this gets to the bigger point where we're going to hear on TV all these talking heads talking about, you know, what this means for the game of golf. And Bill, you and I know that this does not impact the golf that you and I play.
Right.
This is a business decision. It's always been a business decision. It's always been about the money, like you said earlier. And I think if anything, fans of men's professional golf should realize that they've never had your best interest in mind. And players on the PGA Tour should understand, just like any employer, they do not have your best interest in mind. When it comes down to we need to make a business decision, they're always going to do what benefits them. And so to your point, or to your question about what the players are going to do with Jay Monahan, I hope they let him hear it.
I'm not sure he survives this as the commissioner.
I don't either.
Just because his letter says, I shall remain as CEO or commissioner, that doesn't mean he's going to. Remember, the commissioner works at the behest of the players. The players, they have a player council where they elect some of their representatives. And now I do know that there have been some behind the scenes maneuverings that make it more and more difficult to oust a commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
But it can happen. And I would not be shocked if in the next day or so, we were hearing about the ouster of Jay Monahan. However, I also won't be surprised if he signs a 10-year extension. I mean, really, these days, I was just telling somebody yesterday on the golf course, we're talking about how in our culture today, how hard it is to shock us. You know, we're talking about politics a little bit, and I was playing with a group of guys that I don't have any idea what their politics are, but I said to them, you know, I think right now you could probably lead the 6 o'clock national news with, as it turns out, Donald Trump has been married to Nancy Pelosi for 14 years. And we would be like, yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, I got it. Because there's nothing left to shock us with. This news from the tour was pretty shocking.
It really was.
There's just there's so much on the record that made it clear this would never happen.
Correct. And I mean, that's the only word for it. I was, and still am, legitimately shocked that this came out. I was actually in the car with my wife driving. I had to go pick up my car from the shop, and it came through my phone. And to your point, how nothing shocks us anymore. I thought it was a meme or a joke. I didn't think it was real.
I got my first text from a friend of mine who is not a golf fan. And it just said, pretty crazy day in your sport, huh? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Whatever. Did somebody get in an accident? Is there more Tiger news? And then 3 or 4 others start trickling in. And finally, it was a note from my son on the other side of the state. And it said, I cannot believe they merged. And I was on the putting green giving a lesson to a couple of junior high kids whose parents had asked if I would help them out a little bit. And so I'm just teaching them how to hit 5-footers, not hit them 28 feet past the hole. And I look at my phone, I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I said to them, hey, we're going to wrap things up here shortly. And I've got a few things I need to tend to. I did not anticipate the scope of the news that I was then able to read. I thought it was going to be like, oh, there's discussions underway and this will never happen. No, it's done. Here's the memo. So here's the final bit and we'll wrap things up. There is much work to do to get us from a framework agreement to a definitive agreement. It's interesting. But one thing is obvious. Through this transformational agreement and with PIF's collaborative investment, that's the Saudi money, the immeasurable strength of the PGA Tour's history, legacy, and pro-competitive model not only remains intact, but is supercharged for the future. Our game, our players, and our fans will no doubt benefit for years to come. I beg to differ.
Mm.
Final thoughts, Adam Fonseca.
Well, it's an interesting day to say the least. It's been a heck of a week and it's only Tuesday. And, I think what we will find is that professional golf, Bill, as we know it, and maybe it's been this way for a long time because we work with brands, you and I both.
Yeah.
But professional golf has never been more corporate and transactional.
Yeah.
Than it is right now. And I think in the future, I don't know if it's a month, a year, whatever, we as fans are going to have to take a look at what product we choose to ingest and whether or not it matches what you and I reach agreement on in terms of morality. And if that's something, if our entertainment matches what we hold to be important in our lives, and I don't mean to sound heavy-handed, but at the end of the day, it really does boil down to that.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, a catalyst to a decision that we all have to make.
Yeah, good. That's a very good thought. And we won't go into it now, but maybe in a follow-up conversation, we have to look at this from the perspective of the broadcast partners of the tour, who I don't think it's stretching reality too far to say could be challenged with the question of, do we run these commercials for this entity that has some issues, has some morality issues to it? Who knows, right? So the PIF and the Saudis, they have their hands in a little bit of everything, and now they have them in the PGA Tour, which troubles a lot of people and certainly surprises everyone, even if you're not troubled by it. So, Adam, thank you for joining me for the conversation. As I said, we're kind of just getting started, but we wanted to get some initial thoughts out. A lot of people are asking what the heck just happened today. There's your overview with some opinion injected, and we will have further conversation down the road. Adam, thanks again.
Thank you, sir.